She's just a security guard. She's nobody special." Victoria laughed, her voice carrying across the elegant ballroom in Birmingham, Alabama. The sound of crystal glasses clinking and gentle laughter filled the air, but her words cut through it all like a blade. I stood there in my simple navy dress, feeling the weight of 100 judgmental stares as my younger sister introduced me to her wedding guests. "My name is Jasmine Torres. I'm 29 years old, and I had just endured the most humiliating moment of my life." The grand ballroom at the historic Redmont Hotel buzzed with conversation as Birmingham's elite mingled in their designer gowns and tailored suits. Victoria had spared no expense for her wedding to Colonel Nathan Hayes, and every detail screamed luxury and status. Meanwhile, I felt like an imposter in my department store dress, clutching a small gift that probably cost less than the centerpieces. "Jasmine works nights at some office building downtown," Victoria continued, addressing a circle of her new military friends and their wives. "She basically just sits at a desk and watches security cameras. Nothing too exciting." The group chuckled politely, their eyes sliding over me with barely concealed pity. I forced a smile, but inside something dark was stirring. The worst part wasn't Victoria's casual cruelty. I had grown used to that over the years. The worst part was watching our father, Robert Torres, nod along in agreement from across the room. His weathered face, lined from years of working construction, wore an expression of resigned disappointment as he looked at me. "Always been the family disappointment," he said to the man beside him, loud enough for me to hear. "Victoria's the achiever. Made something of herself." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them all exactly who I was and what I had done. But I couldn't. Not yet. My cover was too important, my real work too classified. So I stood there, absorbing their mockery like a sponge, storing every cruel word and dismissive glance for later. They had no idea they were talking to someone who had spent the last 5 years serving her country in ways they couldn't imagine. But as I watched Colonel Hayes approach our little group, something in his posture made me pause. There was a strange recognition in his eyes as he looked at me, though I was certain we had never been formally introduced. Victoria beamed as she pulled him closer, ready to present her prize catch to her disappointing older sister. Little did she know that this moment would change everything. Growing up, Victoria and I had always been different. She was the golden child, the one who brought home perfect report cards, won beauty pageants, and dated the quarterback. I was the tomboy who preferred books to parties and asked too many questions for my own good. Our parents never tried to hide their favoritism. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became the family motto throughout my teenage years. While Victoria pursued a degree in communications and landed a job at a local television station, I quietly enlisted in the Army immediately after high school. My parents saw it as another failure, their daughter who couldn't cut it in the real world, settling for military service. What they didn't know was that I had been recruited for something far more significant than basic military service. My aptitude scores and psychological profiles had caught the attention of military intelligence recruiters. Within months of enlisting, I was pulled into specialized training that I still couldn't discuss with anyone outside my unit. For the past 5 years, I had been living a double life. To my family and old friends, I was Jasmine Torres, the girl who washed out of college and now worked security at various locations around Birmingham. In reality, I was Senior Intelligence Analyst Jasmine Torres, specializing in counterintelligence operations across 3 states. My security guard job was perfect cover. It explained my irregular hours, my ability to access different buildings, and my knowledge of surveillance systems. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Victoria chased local celebrity as a weekend weather reporter, I was tracking actual threats to national security. While she posted Instagram photos from charity brunches, I was analyzing intelligence that could save lives. But maintaining my cover meant enduring years of family disappointment and subtle ridicule. I had tried to hint at my real work once, about 2 years ago. During a family dinner, I mentioned that my job involved more than just watching cameras. My father had laughed and said, "Don't try to make it sound more important than it is, Jasmine. A job's a job." Victoria had added, "At least you're employed, I guess." That was the last time I attempted to correct their assumptions. The hardest part was watching Victoria plan this elaborate wedding to a man she had met only 8 months ago. She bragged constantly about landing a decorated Army colonel, as if Nathan Hayes was a trophy she had won rather than a person she loved. I had stayed quiet when she gushed about his military service, biting my tongue when she got basic facts wrong about military ranks and protocols. Tonight, as I stood in her wedding reception wearing a dress that cost less than her shoes, I wondered if keeping my secret was worth the constant humiliation. Every dismissive comment and pitying look chipped away at my patience. But my training had taught me discipline, and I knew that some battles required perfect timing. The moment that shattered my resolve came during the reception dinner. Victoria had insisted on giving a speech about her new husband, and she pulled me up to the head table as part of her elaborate presentation about family support. I should have known she had something planned. "I want to thank everyone who helped make this day special," Victoria began, her voice projected through the wireless microphone. "Especially my sister Jasmine, who took time off from her security job to be here tonight." The room filled with polite applause, but I could hear the underlying condescension in her tone. "Jasmine has always been the practical one in our family," she continued, and I felt my stomach drop. "While I was pursuing my career in broadcast journalism, she chose a more steady path. She works nights as a security guard at various office buildings around town. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills." The crowd murmured sympathetically, and I caught several guests exchanging meaningful glances. I was being presented as the cautionary tale, the sister who settled for less while Victoria soared to greater heights. "I admire her dedication to such honest work," Victoria added, and the word honest dripped with implications. "Not everyone can handle the pressure of a demanding career. Some people are just built for simpler things." I felt heat rising in my cheeks, but it wasn't embarrassment. It was pure rage. She was deliberately humiliating me in front of a room full of strangers, using my cover story as ammunition for her own ego. I caught my father nodding approvingly from his table, clearly proud of Victoria's backhanded compliment. "Of course, Nathan understands the value of all types of service," Victoria continued, reaching for her new husband's hand. "He's always been supportive of people in security positions, haven't you, honey?" Colonel Hayes had been listening quietly, but something in his expression shifted as Victoria spoke. He was studying me with increasing intensity, his brow furrowed in concentration. I recognized that look. It was the same expression I had seen on intelligence officers when pieces of a puzzle suddenly clicked into place. "Security work can be quite complex," he said slowly, his voice carrying a weight that made several people turn to look at him. "It often involves skills and clearances that aren't immediately obvious to civilians." Victoria laughed, completely missing the subtle correction in his tone. "Well, I'm sure Jasmine does her best with whatever training they gave her. Right, Jazz?" She turned to me with that bright, fake smile I had grown to hate, expecting me to play along with her narrative of my mediocrity. But as I looked at Colonel Hayes, I saw something in his eyes that made my pulse quicken. Recognition. He knew. Somehow this man I had never formally met was beginning to piece together exactly who I really was. The question was, what was he going to do about it? Colonel Hayes stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the polished floor. The casual conversation around our table died as guests noticed his sudden change in demeanor. Victoria beamed, assuming her new husband was about to add his own praise to her touching speech about her simple sister. "Actually," Nathan said, his voice carrying the authority that came with years of military command, "I think there might be some confusion about Jasmine's work." I felt my heart skip a beat. This was it, the moment I had been dreading and anticipating for 5 years. My cover was about to be blown at my sister's wedding reception, in front of 200 guests, by a man I barely knew. "Honey, what do you mean?" Victoria asked, her smile faltering slightly as she sensed something shift in the atmosphere. Nathan's eyes locked with mine, and I saw a mixture of respect and apology in his gaze. Jasmine Torres, Senior Intelligence Analyst, 3rd Army Intelligence Division, specializing in counterintelligence operations. Congressional Medal of Merit recipient, Department of Defense Exceptional Civilian Service Award winner. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and then something approaching horror as the implications sank in. Around the room, conversation stopped mid-sentence as guests tried to process what they had just heard. "I'm sorry, what?" Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. Nathan continued, his tone growing more formal as he recited details that made my stomach clench. 3 years ago, Analyst Torres provided critical intelligence that prevented a coordinated attack on military installations across the southeast. Her work directly saved the lives of over 400 service members and civilians. I wanted to sink through the floor. These were details that were supposed to remain classified, accomplishments that I could never discuss with anyone outside my chain of command. Yet here was this colonel, revealing my most protected secrets to a room full of strangers at a wedding reception. 6 months ago, Nathan continued, her intelligence analysis helped my unit identify and neutralize a cell that was planning to target military families in the Birmingham area. Without her work, my soldiers might not have made it home to their own families. Victoria was staring at me as if I had suddenly sprouted wings. The color had drained from her face, and her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the microphone. Around the room, guests were whispering urgently to each other, trying to reconcile the simple security guard they had just heard about with the decorated intelligence officer being described. That's not possible," Victoria stammered. "Jasmine works at office buildings. She watches security cameras. She told you exactly what she was supposed to tell you," Nathan said firmly. "Maintaining operational security often requires cover stories, even with family members, especially with family members." I felt exposed and vulnerable, like every carefully constructed wall I had built around my secret life was crumbling. But there was also a strange sense of relief. For 5 years, I had endured my family's disappointment and condescension, letting them believe I was a failure because my real work was too important to risk exposing. My father had gone completely still at his table, his wine glass suspended halfway to his lips. The man who had called me the family disappointment just minutes ago was now staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Around him, other guests were pulling out their phones, probably trying to look up information about the awards Nathan had mentioned. Victoria finally found her voice again, but it came out shaky and uncertain. "Why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you tell me?" Before I could answer, Nathan spoke again, and his words hit the room like a thunderclap. "Because, Mrs. Hayes, the work your sister does requires a level of discretion and sacrifice that most people can't comprehend. While you've been building a career in local media, she's been serving her country in ways that could get her killed if the wrong people knew her identity." The revelation hit the room like a shockwave, but Nathan wasn't finished. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something that made my blood run cold. A military commendation folder with official seals that I recognized immediately. 6 months ago, during Operation Southern Shield, intelligence analyst Torres identified a pattern in surveillance data that my entire intelligence team had missed. Nathan continued, his voice carrying across the now silent ballroom. A domestic terrorist cell was planning to attack the families of deployed soldiers during a base family day event. Victoria's grip on the microphone tightened, her knuckles turning white. The room was so quiet I could hear the air conditioning humming in the background. The attack was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon when over 800 family members, including dozens of children, would be gathered in an open area with minimal security, Nathan said. Jasmine's analysis didn't just identify the threat. She pinpointed the exact timing, location, and method they planned to use. I watched my father's face as Nathan spoke. The man who had dismissed my work as simple security monitoring was learning that his daughter had helped prevent a massacre. His wine glass trembled in his hand. The intelligence Jasmine provided allowed us to evacuate the area and apprehend the entire cell before they could act, Nathan continued. But here's what really demonstrates her character. She specifically requested that her role in the operation remain classified. She didn't want recognition or publicity. She just wanted to do her job. Victoria was staring at me with an expression I had never seen before. It wasn't just shock. It was something approaching fear, as if she was realizing that she had been systematically humiliating someone whose work was literally life and death. Nathan opened the commendation folder, revealing an official document with government seals and signatures. This is a letter of commendation from the Secretary of Defense, specifically citing Analyst Torres for her exceptional dedication to protecting American lives and preventing terrorist activities on United States soil. The room erupted in whispers. Several military guests in attendance immediately stood at attention, recognizing the significance of what they were hearing. I caught sight of a few people frantically typing on their phones, probably trying to verify the information. But the most impressive thing about Jasmine Torres, Nathan said, his voice growing warmer, is that she's been enduring years of family criticism and assumptions about her simple job, never once breaking her cover or seeking the recognition she deserves. That level of discipline and sacrifice is exactly why she's one of the most respected analysts in her division. Victoria finally managed to speak, but her voice was barely audible. Jasmine, is all of this true? Before I could answer, Nathan pulled out his phone and showed the screen to the nearest guests. This is the Department of Defense Personnel Directory. You can look up Senior Intelligence Analyst J. Torres right now if you want verification. I watched as several people immediately pulled out their own phones, probably doing exactly that. The era of instant information meant that my cover story would be completely blown within minutes, but somehow I felt more relieved than panicked. The question is, Nathan said, looking directly at Victoria, why did you feel the need to publicly humiliate someone whose service record includes preventing terrorist attacks and saving hundreds of American lives? Victoria's face had gone from pale to completely ashen. She looked around the room at her wedding guests, many of whom were now staring at her with expressions ranging from confusion to disapproval. The woman who had spent the evening presenting herself as superior to her simple sister was learning that she had been attacking a genuine American hero. The silence stretched until my father's wine glass finally slipped from his nerveless fingers and shattered on the marble floor. The sharp sound seemed to break the spell that had fallen over the room, and suddenly, everyone was talking at once. "Dad," I said quietly, my voice somehow carrying despite the growing commotion around us. Robert Torres stared at me across the room, his weathered face cycling through emotions I had never seen before. Shock, confusion, and something that might have been pride warred with the obvious guilt of a man who had just realized he had been wrong about his daughter for years. "Jasmine," he said, his voice hoarse. "Honey, we didn't know." "You weren't supposed to know," I replied, finally finding my voice. That was the whole point. Victoria was still frozen at the head table, the microphone hanging limply in her hand. Around the room, guests were clustering in small groups, their phones out as they frantically searched for information about military intelligence operations and the awards Nathan had mentioned. "This can't be real," Victoria whispered. But even as she said it, I could see the doubt creeping into her expression. Too many details were checking out. Too many pieces were falling into place. Nathan stepped closer to me, his expression apologetic. "I'm sorry, Jasmine. I know you didn't want your cover blown, but I couldn't sit there and listen to..." He gestured toward Victoria, who was still staring at us in shock. "It's okay," I said, surprised to find that I meant it. "Maybe it's time." The truth was, maintaining my cover had become exhausting. 5 years of letting my family believe I was a failure. 5 years of enduring their subtle disappointment and Victoria's not-so-subtle superiority had taken a toll I hadn't fully realized until this moment. "Mrs. Hayes," Nathan said, turning back to Victoria. I think you owe your sister an apology." Victoria's mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to speak. Jasmine, I had no idea. You never said anything. You let us think." "I let you think exactly what I was trained to let you think," I interrupted, my voice stronger now. "My cover required a believable story about unremarkable work. You and Dad made it easy by never asking questions." The accusation hung in the air between us. Victoria had always been so focused on her own achievements that she had never bothered to dig deeper into my supposed mediocrity. She had accepted the story of my failure because it made her success shine brighter. "But why didn't you trust us?" Victoria asked, and for the first time in years, she sounded genuinely vulnerable. "We're your family." I looked around the room at the 200 wedding guests who had spent the evening hearing about my supposed inadequacy, then back at my sister who had orchestrated the humiliation. "Because this is exactly what would have happened," I said simply. "You would have found a way to make it about yourself. You would have told people, posted about it on social media, turned my service into content for your career." Victoria's face flushed red, but she couldn't deny the accuracy of my assessment. She had built her local celebrity status on sharing personal stories and family drama. There was no way she would have been able to keep my secret. "The difference between us, Victoria," I continued, "is that I spent 5 years protecting a secret that could get people killed if it was exposed incorrectly. You couldn't even keep quiet about my supposed failure without turning it into a public spectacle at your own wedding. The transformation in the room was immediate and devastating. Within minutes of Nathan's revelation, Victoria's carefully orchestrated wedding reception had turned into something resembling a military honors ceremony. Several active duty officers in attendance approached me to express their respect, while others pulled out their phones to verify Nathan's claims through official channels. "Ma'am, is it true you received the Congressional Medal of Merit?" asked a young lieutenant, his voice filled with awe. I nodded, feeling strangely disconnected from the suddenly respectful attention. For 5 years, I had been invisible at family gatherings, dismissed as the underachieving sister who worked a dead-end security job. Now these same people were treating me like a war hero. Victoria watched this transformation with growing horror. Her wedding, her perfect day of being the center of attention, was rapidly becoming a celebration of her sister's hidden accomplishments. Guests who had politely ignored me all evening were now asking about my service, my awards, my experiences. "I can't believe you saved those families," said one of Victoria's college friends, a woman who had barely acknowledged my existence an hour earlier. "That's incredible." Meanwhile, my father approached slowly, his face still pale from shock. "Jasmine, sweetheart, I owe you the biggest apology of my life." The man who had called me the family disappointment just an hour ago was now looking at me with tears in his eyes. The complete reversal of his attitude should have been satisfying, but mostly it just felt sad. All those years of his subtle disapproval and disappointment, all those times he had compared me unfavorably to Victoria, had been based on a lie he had helped create through his own assumptions. "Dad, you couldn't have known," I said, though the words felt hollow. The truth was, he could have asked more questions. He could have shown more interest in my life instead of simply accepting that I was a failure. Victoria's humiliation was complete and devastating. Her own wedding guests were now gathered around me, asking about my military service and expressing admiration for sacrifices they were only now learning about. The woman who had spent the evening presenting herself as the successful sister was watching her narrative crumble in real time. "I need some air," Victoria announced suddenly, her voice shaky. She thrust the microphone at Nathan and fled toward the ballroom's balcony doors, her designer wedding dress trailing behind her. I followed her outside, where she stood gripping the marble railing and staring out at Birmingham's skyline. Her shoulders were shaking, and I realized she was crying. 5 years, Jasmine," she said without turning around. 5 years you let me think I was better than you. 5 years you let Dad treat you like a disappointment. 5 years you let me make jokes about your simple job. And 5 years you never bothered to ask what I actually did," I replied. 5 years you never showed any interest in my life beyond what made you feel superior. She turned to face me, mascara streaking down her cheeks. You could have told me. You could have trusted me. Could I? I asked. Be honest, Victoria. If I had told you 3 years ago that I was a decorated intelligence analyst, what would you have done? She opened her mouth to protest, then closed it again. We both knew the answer. She would have found a way to make it about herself, would have bragged to her friends, would have posted subtle hints on social media. She would have turned my service into content for her personal brand. I'm sorry, she whispered finally. I'm so sorry. But her apology felt too little. Too late. The damage to our relationship had been building for years, and tonight had simply exposed fractures that had always been there. The fallout from that night was swift and lasting. Victoria's local television career never recovered from the viral video of her humiliating her decorated military sister at her own wedding. Within weeks, clips of Nathan's revelation were circulating on social media with captions like, "Bride publicly shames sister who secretly saved hundreds of lives. The station quietly let her contract expire." My father fell into a deep depression, haunted by years of dismissing a daughter who had been serving her country with distinction. He started attending therapy and sending me long letters filled with apologies I wasn't ready to accept. Their social circle in Birmingham never quite looked at either of them the same way again. The experience taught me that revenge served cold can be the most satisfying of all. Not because I had orchestrated Victoria's downfall, but because I had simply let the truth speak for itself when the moment was right.